Hello and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of New Food and our sponsor Starlims, I'd like to thank you all for attending. In a fast-moving world where consumer needs, demands, expectations change constantly, it's critical that food and beverage manufacturers and everybody involved in the food and beverage industry remain innovative, flexible, adapting better processes to help us deliver quickly, quality, safe and compliant products while still getting to market quickly. But delivering quality food and beverage products is complex. It's often filled with challenges that can slow down or even halt manufacturing. So what can manufacturers do to stay ahead of the curve, and where do they start? And in particular, how can Informatics help? With me today to discuss this are Lee Reese, Global Food and Safety Quality and Improvement Manager at the Kraft Heinz Company, and Brandon Henning, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at Starlims. And joining us shortly, he's having a few technical difficulties, will be Adeni Odubemi, Global Director of Food Safety at ADM. So, Lee, can you just start by just introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Lee Reese. I originally came into the food industry about 17 years ago, came from sort of pharmaceutical side, and I run a team globally that looks after improving food safety and quality using new technology and new methodologies. So I work in about 80 different plants around the world. So I get a lot of contact with different informatics systems, different processes and different products, all from all over the globe. So a wide range of experience that we have to bring to bear.
And Brandon.
Sure. Thanks, Ian. Brandon Henning, again, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer for Starlims. Actually started my career working for a large food company in manufacturing IT. So responsible for all the systems that went into manufacturing across roughly 50 different plants, including informatics solutions like LIMS and ELN and others. And then after that, I've spent some time working for vendors, really with the purpose of trying to build better solutions for customers based on my years of experience in IT implementation and in manufacturing.
Excellent stuff. So I think let's just start talking a little bit about consumer behavior and demand. So Lee, can you give us your perspective on how changing consumer behaviors and demand have impacted food and beverage products and processes that you, your customers, the people you work with have worked on?
Definitely. One of the things we've certainly seen over the last few years is a huge increase in the demand from our consumers on quality and consistency of our products. These require improving current standards all the time. Before we were very happy with our standards, we had very high standards that we adhered to, but now we have to improve those more to a point where we didn't think we could get any better, but by using better data, better systems, being able to see where the gaps are and taking the feedback directly from consumers and customers has kind of enabled us to improve those areas. But that improvement in consistency is definitely a driver for us. And a different style of products are being demanded by consumers as well. So changes in formulation to make products more natural, more store-cupboard ingredients, taking away the food additives that people perceived as being unhealthy. Has given us a lot of challenges from a production environment. So I'm more from an operations side of the business. So being able to make the stuff safely is key to that. And by taking out those ingredients that customers and consumers don't want anymore, has given us a lot of challenges on how we produce the food safely and of high enough quality still.
Brandon, you're obviously working with a lot of clients and customers. How do you see that kind of changing consumer behavior impacting on food and beverage?
I think the way we see it is something like the way we described, right, which is needing the ability to more dynamically be able to manage new formulations, different kinds of formulations, the ability to produce different kind of products with new additives and new ingredients they may not have worked with in the past, being able to quickly get from kind of pilot manufacturing to scale with new formulations, new recipes, whether that's a new product or existing products. Like, we've had customers that have gone from like having 100 recipes for one product to 400 recipes for the same product, and like, how do you scale and manufacture those various different recipes, especially when you think about global distribution and the differences between, you know, what a customer in the US might want and a customer in Korea wants. Those may be very different formulations of a similar product. So we see a lot of need to continue to be able to scale and expand their quality capability and test faster and more effectively kind of through that scaling.
I think that's a really interesting one. Just following up on that a bit,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've seen quite a lot across the food and beverage industry is there has been this increase in pace driven by consumer demand. Lee,
A
is
lot of
that your
change.
kind of experience?
Yeah, very much so. The pace of change has increased vastly. So when I started in the business maybe 20 years ago, we had a set of products that we'd made forever and nothing really changed. But now there seems to be a new product or a new ingredient coming along every month that needs to be incorporated, needs to be tested, needs to be made sure it's safe. We need to make sure that it's going to work in our production process. And those changes are definitely constant and becoming faster and faster as people become more demanding, more aware, understand the products better. And new opportunities present themselves in the supply chain as well.
I think that kind of leads me on a little bit to talking about the role of quality control and lab testing in helping organizations like yours kind of scale and get to market faster. That's something, I mean, how do those all interplay with each other, Lee?
I mean, it's a vital part of the cog, isn't it? It's one of the first things that has to be done. And certainly when we've got new techniques, new ingredients, new production methodologies, the validation of those is the key to it, and getting those done quickly is vital to the speed to market. Previously, it might have taken us several months to validate a new process or understand a new ingredient enough to make us confident we were able to use it. But by using data better and the informatics systems better, we can understand that much quicker. We can use previous experience more effectively as well. If we've got all the data to hand and we can understand how other similar things have performed in the past, we can transfer that knowledge much faster. Whereas before we test over and over again, with more integrated systems, we can understand it and predict it more confidently. So we can shorten those validation methods by using previous knowledge, and having that well documented, well presented is a vital part of that.
Brandon, you must see this a lot as well. I mean, what kind of role does quality control and lab testing play in helping organizations scale and move faster?
Yeah, I think that's to kind of expand on that. We're seeing something very similar, right? What we're seeing is, well, we're kind of seeing twofold things. We're seeing the demand and the need for quality control to increase, right? Because so much of your ability to get products to market more quickly, to get those batches out, to get the products to the consumers they want, requires a robust quality control process. Like when we talk to a lot of our customers, one of the main reasons that they're talking to us is exactly that. Like we've got a bunch of new formulations, or we've got new changes or new products coming to market, and basically the thing we care about is getting them through manufacturing to the consumer as fast as possible. But along with that, what they're also struggling with is decrease in resourcing. So we're seeing they have constraints on finding people that want to work in quality control and manufacturing in the lab. I think, as more and more jobs go remote, the idea of going into a career where I have to come into the factory every day to work in a lab isn't as appealing as it used to be. So we're seeing kind of a downturn in resource availability with an upturn in the need to drive quality, which I think to some degree, to Lee's point, is ultimately moving quality control departments into more systematized ways of doing business, more data analytics, and really to some degree driving kind of that quality 4.0 vision we've had for several years, which is managing quality better through data and process than just people taking
doing checks. Like that. That's exactly it, Brendan. That's what we're seeing. Where we're improving is taking away the human element of gathering that data, using the systems, using the equipment to feedback, rather than having to go and take a sample to go to a lab and test it. Is getting the information directly from the production lines. Gives us a much faster response time, cuts down on the amount of product we have to hold, the amount of product we have to test, and enables much better information that we can use to manage the processes better.
Yeah, that's another thing we're seeing, Lee, to your point, is we're seeing the idea of the lab change from the lab to everywhere, right? Meaning in process testing at the point of, let's say I'm going to add a sweetener to increase the bricks of my product as an example, testing that right there as I add it to see if I'm getting the sweetener profile after a certain amount of time of cooking, as opposed to waiting until I bring that into the lab and do some kind of flavor test or spec test or something like that, where I get more data in real time and I know if I need to make batch changes while those batches are being produced, as opposed to what we used to do when I first started was sample came into the lab, didn't exactly meet our spec, moved into add back, then we redosed that in over time into a new formulation, which is expensive, not as effective, drove up the cost of manufacturing, and now we're seeing a lot more real-time data collection in process.
The other thing I've seen as well is starting to use that data to predict failure rather than reacting to it and trying to put it right after the event. It's able to see the problems coming in advance. We can start to see processes starting to drift and react to that and correct it before it goes out of specification, before it becomes a problem, which is a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, we're seeing that too. We're seeing a huge increase in customers wanting FPC linked to their sampling and things like that, so they can do predictive analysis, not just the traditional kind of reactive sample-based hold analysis.
I mean, is that move to predictive analysis one of the biggest technological shifts that you're seeing in food and beverage manufacturing generally? It sounds like it's a really impactful move across the board.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in this job in food safety and quality maybe 15 or so years ago, it was all about detection, finding the problems, and then we deal with it once we found it. Stop it going out the door, but find the problem first and then react to it. And that's where it probably continued for 5 to 10 years. But now it's definitely more about, well, we want to find out and realize this is going to go wrong before we start wasting the product. There's environmental associations with that as well. When we're putting less product down the drain, but we're having to send less to landfill because we're not making the mistakes in the first place. Any errors picked up much faster, and where we can predict those failures are coming, which is there's a range of different systems we could talk about that can do that. That's definitely the way forward, because we'd much rather not make the mistake in the first place than find out about it later on.
Brandon, what kind of other technological shifts are you seeing as impacting food and beverage manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, we're seeing it's almost kind of a mindset shift that drives technology, which is we want to sample things in real time. Well, for starters, we want to automate the process as effectively as possible so that we get to, we used to call it the concept of like this golden batch, right? I want to be able to produce at the best effect time and time again, every time. But when you're trying to do that through dislinked automation or some view of automation in paper and kind of your SOP printed out, like that becomes difficult. So we're seeing a big investment in just kind of refined automation across the process to as early as possible.
But when you're trying to do that through,
getting a little replay echo there, sorry. And then along with that, automating like the manufacturing of it, we're seeing so much of the testing moving out of the lab where it was more reactive to in the process, where they're making investments in things like the IoT devices, the equipment and the sensors needed to be able to collect that data in real time, analyze that data, run it through your labs with SPC kind of capability to get to predictive analysis. So we're seeing a lot of that investment. And to some degree, we're seeing food and bev kind of lead that from a technology perspective, especially in some of those real-time sensors and things you put out in the manufacturing plants.
It's interesting you say that you're seeing food and bev lead in that area, because my perception, and this may be completely wrong, is that food and beverage was maybe a little bit behind the curve in some senses. Lee, is that how you kind of see it, or is it, or am I completely wrong? I may well be wrong on this.
No, I think things like probably the pharmaceutical industry, obviously they don't make the mistakes in the first place. The oil kind of more manufacturing systems have perhaps been a little bit better in the past, but I think the food and beverage is catching up fast because there's such a dynamic process. Foodstuffs don't, it's not like a chemical process always. People sometimes think it is, but it's an organic thing, and you get variation, you get change that has to be kept on top of. So we have to be able to react to that. We may have a tomato paste that's a little bit less acidic than it was last week's. It's come from a different area, a different crop, and we have to adapt the process to be able to cope with that. So getting the large amounts of data back that we can get now and being able to analyze that more quickly is of a huge advantage. So I think the food and beverage industry is perhaps not leading the way, but it's certainly catching up fast and seeing big advantages from being able to do that.
And I think to some degree, consumers are driving that, right? Meaning like, I kind of think of like when I was a kid, like if something tastes a little different in this jar than last jar, we were okay with that. But I think to Lee's point, you see different tomatoes have different levels of acidity, and you need a slightly different recipe. But what you're not finding is consumers kind of willing to deal with the profile flavor changes. They're more demanding, and you need more sensors and more data to kind of make sure that you're always getting to that ideal profile of the product that your brand is known for. And I think because of some of those consumer buying behaviors with all the new formulation coming and the demand to have the same product time and time again, in what is a very variable process, because you have raw materials you can't control. Like there's a lot of control you have in pharma and other things. In food, there's a lot of things out of your control when you get the initial raw ingredient in. So to be able to control that through manufacturing is important, and we're seeing more investment than we ever had from food companies who, yeah, I would agree with Lee. When I kind of started in manufacturing IT, we tended to lag behind, but we're seeing that change.
Yeah. I come back again to what I said at the beginning, that expectation from the consumer that it's going to be the same every time, wherever they are in the world, is something that has changed over the last few years, and that is driving that adaptation to using the data to understand the process better and keep that consistency that we need.
And I think that's a really interesting point, Lee, because you mentioned pharma, and I think maybe one of the slight differences between food and beverage and pharma is that the inputs, in a sense, for pharma are a little bit more predictable. You're not talking about crops growing and
they're not digging it out of the ground.
No, exactly. So I think in a sense, yeah, I can see where in that sense that kind of real-time or almost real-time informatics is, if anything, more important in food and beverage to ensure that quality of the output.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the drive is coming from, to reduce that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I implemented when I was in IT was an advanced grading system for cucumbers, so we could make sure we got the right pickle every time.
Yeah.
But like, spent a lot of money on a system to grade cucumbers, and now that plant takes all kinds of graded cucumbers, and they've spent more money through the process of how they ferment and do all the other work to enable them to use more variants, as opposed to simply saying we can't buy these cucumbers because they're not going to fit our spec for what we're trying to produce.
Yeah,
like that's a good point. Right, is better utilization of raw material through better data and technology than so much of the upfront testing of the raw material coming in, which is also good for manufacturers, but it's good for consumers too.
Yeah, because if you're getting the data and you're able to react, you can cope with a wider variation in the specification that previously we may not have been able to cope with. A cucumber that's 10 centimeters too long, but now because we know it's coming and we can know how to deal with it, we can cope with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me on a little bit to something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm sure you are too, which is sustainability and avoiding food wastage. And how can informatics generally and informatics systems kind of contribute to sustainability efforts within the food and beverage industry?
Well, I think I mentioned it before. It's predicting the failure. We don't have batches that are spoiled because we've seen the problem coming and we've been able to react and stop that issue occurring, so we don't get the waste to begin with. I think that's probably the biggest capability, and a little bit to what you said as well, Brandon. Being able to adapt and being able to take a wider range of a broader specification means there's less that's outside the specification, so it doesn't have to go to waste. And the reaction and the ability to deal with it all means there's less going to landfill or going down the drain, because we get it right first time, and we can cope with any variation that previously would have been a problem. We can now deal with, because we've got the information, we've got the data to show us what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add to that, like beyond sustainability of the food, I think about energy usage and water usage and all the things that go into producing food. If you get the batch right the first time, all of those resources you've consumed are consumed, and you've gotten that product where it's supposed to go. The minute I have to use that as add back, well, now I'm creating a new batch, reconsuming things that I've had. I'm using more energy, potentially needing to add more water. Like I'm doing different things from the formulation that may consume more resources than what the initial batch created. Plus there's just simply, I've got to store that somewhere. Now I've got cold storage. I've got all kinds of things I have to consider that I may not need when I'm producing my batch the first time correctly. So I think, to Lee's point, we're definitely better from a just pure raw material consumption and utilization, but I think through that, we're also getting better at resource consumption of things like water and raw material, utilities and water and things that go into the process, which are making manufacturing overall more sustainable.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And
definitely.
that's really vital. I think it's what I'm kind of hearing from you both is that there are almost two levels of kind of ways that informatics can help. There is obviously what you might think of as the not quite tactical, but the ability to do real-time analytics to get things done. Are there any kind of more strategic ways that we can use informatics within the food and beverage industry around quality?
I mean, one of the ways we see our customers doing a lot is in leveraging more informatics solution in early R&D to do discovery and experimentation more quickly. And we see it a lot in, kind of to Lee's point earlier, in that pilot stage of manufacturing where you want to scale and being able to figure out which recipe is going to produce the ultimate result more quickly and how you're going to scale that into manufacturing so you can get that new product from ideation to commercialization more quickly, right? Because that's also part of the strategy, especially in food and bev, is you want to be the first one to market with the new product because that's where all the margin is. And as every kind of product after that, like, you know, the first company that came with premixed brownies, they still command the highest price for those brownies and everybody else kind of gets a little price after that. So you want to be the first one to bring those innovations to market. You want to do as effectively as possible. And we're seeing a lot of food companies starting to use informatics solutions to help them in that strategic new product introduction phase of their business, which traditionally wasn't a place that got a lot of funding or automation historically.
So, Lee, do you want to talk a little bit about the systems that you're currently using to manage quality in manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of different systems that we use. Some of the main ones are kind of homegrown, home-produced systems that we use internally. But what we're pushing towards more and more now is a single source of truth for all those different systems. Where we can amalgamate and bring them together, we do. But there's still some systems they are the best for the job, like a LIM system or a traceability system that are specific for those tasks, and we can't really use anything else. We don't want to use anything else for those because they do such a good job. But what's changing now, I think, is the way we report the information for that. Instead of getting 5 different reports from 5 different systems, we'll bring all that into a single reporting unit. So we're going to get a single report, which brings the data from those different systems together in one place, which makes the interpretation of that information much, much simpler, much more obvious to people. Being able to see all the data in one area in a single report or a dashboard on a monitor on a production floor, for example, it gives us a much better understanding of how those different things are interacting. And again, it helps us predict the failures much faster. It helps us see problems much easier. Whereas before we might have had a report in one area of the factory and another report in another area of the factory, and those two reports might never have met. Now it's all presented together. And that's given us a lot of additional information that we were definitely missing out on before, and we're using it much better now. So that's been the main system improvement I've seen over the last few years, is the amalgamation of all the different data we've got. It's come off paper, it's come off spreadsheets, and it's into a single, easy-to-use system that everyone can use. The democratization of the data has been a really important thing for us. Now, an operator can see exactly what's going on the line. He can report back to his line manager and understand the changes they have to make. A quality technician may be able to pick up on a problem and report that back much faster. And our operations directors can see what's happening in all the factories all over the world and understand much better how things are working. And what that's done for us, a lot of places have been able to improve on where we can pick up on best practices. We can see, why is that line producing at sort of a 78% efficiency where that one's only at 45, see those differences and being able to understand where we can improve and bring that data together. Before, we wouldn't have been able to see that comparison. So the systems we've used and bring them together, the biggest advantage for me that I've seen is bringing all that information into a single place that everyone can get a hold of and everyone can understand.
And I think actually Denny Odugbemi has been able to join us via phone. Denny, are you out there? Maybe, maybe not. Somewhere in the internet. I think maybe he's still having a few problems with the technology, which I can totally understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we can't hear you, Denny. So just to press on with a few more questions. Oh, wait a minute. Do we have him?
There's a beep.
I heard the beep.
There's a beep. That was it. Hello? Okay, no, I think we'll just have to press on without you for the moment, Agden. Let's see if we can get your audio working, get you in at some point. So just thinking about technology adoption, I mean, what are the kind of key technologies driving informatics in the food and beverage center, and companies effectively adopt them? That's one for you, Brandon.
So I think as we I think for one, Lee said it well, we're seeing a lot of adoption of data reporting and data management systems to bring all of the various informatics data together. So to Lee's point, LIMS is very good at working in the lab and to some degree taking process samples in process. You get your traceability systems, you may have your MES systems that are collecting other data, other in-process quality control, you've got HACCP systems, you've got all these kind of systems that are very much designed for purpose-built data collection. But to get to that ultimate predictability, then you need to be able to report on that data kind of combined all together, because you want to know, like, did I miss a critical control point, and did that have, like, I want to know that before the sample got into the lab, and you want to be able to see that data and predict on that data. So we're seeing a lot of, data analytics systems, whether those are coming from the specific vendors that are offering the solutions, or if they're going to a big data solution, we're seeing a lot of that. But we're also seeing in that investment is a lot of just the core informatics solutions being implemented, because to Lee's point, it's hard to get that data from Excel or Word or something like that. So we're behind that, we're seeing a lot of systemization of what used to be manual or paper process or kind of Excel Word processing. And we're also seeing a lot of investment in kind of those real-time sensors and other things you can put right in process, where you can collect that data in real time, whether you're feeding that into one of the data collection systems or directly into the data management and data reporting solution itself. So we're seeing all of that kind of investment from customers as we look at, food and beverage scaling and getting more digitized and more data driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the online sensors that are expanding quickly from what I've seen. It's been able to plug in a sensor into a line that can detect physical parameters that we've not been able to do online before. We've relied on taking a sample and putting it in a machine to measure it offline. And we're seeing a lot more sensors now. A lot of small startup companies that are producing different kinds of sensors that are able to detect the physical and chemical, microbiological even parameters of the product that in real time that we've not been able to do before. And that's a really valuable thing for any production process, getting that feedback immediately rather than having to wait for a lab sample. So that's been the biggest improvement and biggest innovation that I've seen over the last few months. Even is new kinds of sensors like, oh, we didn't know we could measure that, and now we can. And that all feeds into those systems and that data that we can use to make the right decisions.
Yeah,
I think that. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Tools like LIMS and things like that is, to Lee's point, once you've collected that data, you want to feed it into something, and they don't just naturally feed into Word, Excel, or some of the tools that our customers used to use. So I think those sensors drive kind of level 2 system investment, which then supports kind of that level 3 data management system investment that we're seeing across the industry.
Yeah.
I think this kind of just to kind of pick up on that it is an area where there is constant change. So new sensors being developed, new stuff happening all the time. What are the kind of challenges, Brandon, especially kind of what are you seeing are the challenges for kind of implementing systems like this?
Well, I think data security is always going to be one challenge that we have to be aware of, right? Like, the more devices you put on the internet, the more our customers become concerned about data security, the more systems move into the cloud, the more SaaS-based solutions that are available, the more they're concerned about data security. And I think, given what we know about the world right now, that's a fair perspective, right? I think data security is something that we should all be concerned about. And I think that's one of the things that, as vendors, we have to take very seriously is ensuring that we're providing that level of data security and supporting our customers and working with them so that as we're collecting all this data and digitizing it and making it available to them, that we're also securing it in a way that is responsible and safe for them.
Lee, I definitely wouldn't expect you to tell us anything about Kraft Heinz data security, but you know, are you seeing the same?
Fantastic. Yeah,
obviously.
definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I've got a training course to do after this on that exact subject, so it's something we're very strong on, like everybody else is. It is a big concern. One of the biggest barriers we've had, to be honest, for the take up is OT capability within the factories. Some of our factories are very old, they're 60, 100 years old, big old buildings with very thick solid walls, and simply getting the Wi-Fi and the connection to each point in a production process is a physical challenge as much as anything else. So even base level stuff like being able to connect those sensors to something that they can take the data is a challenge. It's obviously it's surmountable, but it takes resources, it takes money that is rare in some cases, and certainly for smaller companies, it might be a more difficult thing. Small medium enterprises are going to find it a struggle to physically do some of the work, I suspect. But if they get it done, the advantages are huge.
I think that's one of the interesting things as well, is that with all big technology projects like this, and this often is a big technology project, it's kind of understanding how to start, really, how to kind of, you know, especially for maybe smaller businesses, how do you start? I mean, Brandon, what's your advice to kind of companies that are really starting to get their informatics strategy in the right place? Where would you start?
Well, I think I would start first with getting a clear view of what my ROI is and what I'm trying to achieve with that investment. Like a clear view of what problem I really am trying to solve and what the value of solving that problem is. Because what we often see is when they start implementing informatics solutions, what customers want to do is exactly what they've done traditionally on paper or in some kind of Excel Word solution, which isn't exactly maybe the workflow of the way the informatics solution is intended to work, because the ROI, I think, to Lee's point, is more about the data extraction and data analysis, not just the data capture. But sometimes we get so focused on, like, did I capture the data, that we lose kind of sight of the end value. So I would make sure you're clear on what your needs are and what your ROI is, and then find, you know, a solution. Generally, smaller companies are probably looking for SaaS or something where they don't need a bunch of infrastructure that is going to enable them to kind of meet that ROI and get up and running. Over-engineering is one of the biggest problems that we see. Just that I want to over-engineer that IT system, and I want it to do exactly the way I do things today. But part of today is probably not as efficient as you need it to be, which is why you want a system in the first place. So it's that change of getting to where you need to go.
Obviously one of the hottest topics always in the food and beverage industry is around regulatory compliance and making sure we are all compliant at all times with all of the many regulations that we have to work with. Are there any areas where kind of informatics can help with that? Does it unlock some new capabilities, Lee?
It speeds things up hugely, and the sort of audit trails and things like that are much simpler to find and demonstrate for compliance purposes. Traceability is improved hugely through informatics. It's no longer an 8-hour job and hundreds of pieces of paper and 15 departments you have to go around to gather all the information. It's there at the press of a button, and you can get full traceability within a couple of minutes. So that's been a huge advantage. What I guess that does mean is we can be much more accurate, and we can be much more demanding of companies as well to provide better and better data to show and demonstrate regulatory compliance. So I think the standards should go up. It should improve the standards as well as the ability for us to answer the questions and show compliance. I think the standards should go up because now we can do it a lot easier and a lot better. Why wouldn't we? And we can start demanding more of the industry. I shouldn't say this, should I? Start demanding more of the industry from regulatory side, because now the ability is there for anyone really to be able to give it and provide that data.
I think actually, sorry, Brandon, you go.
From our customers, we're seeing that, right? So Lee, you mentioned validating your process earlier, and like the whole thing that goes into system validation. I mean, like I said, many years ago, I don't want to age myself, I started in manufacturing IT, and we implemented systems, and like no one talked about CFR 21 Part 11, no one talked about GAM5, no one talked about system validation, but most of the food companies that we are working with now expect the same level of compliance and validation from the vendors that pharma companies expect. So we are seeing a lot of change in kind of driving that quality and expectations of that quality compliance to some degree, not quite as rigid, but much closer to what you would expect from pharma, which the good news there is most of the informatics solutions are going to come across were originally designed for pharma anyway, so they're going to meet those needs. But the industry certainly has a much higher expectation than it did, say, 20, 30 years ago when we first started automating our processes.
I think a good example of that is probably serialization, something that the pharmaceutical industry's had for a long time, and it's now starting to creep into the food industry in certain sectors. And that's a hugely valuable system and not actually that difficult to implement. When I first heard about serialization and trying to understand that how it could be used in food, I thought, wow, that's not going to happen. But it's actually quite straightforward. It can be done relatively simply. And that's a hugely powerful tool, both from the regulatory side and for us, being able to limit the size of, God forbid, a recall or withdrawal. We can really narrow the scale of those things with serialization and provide much better feedback to the authorities. So there's new things coming that aren't that far off that maybe even a year ago we would have thought we wouldn't be capable of doing.
I think actually Adeni may actually be able to speak now. Adeni, are you able to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Fantastic. Welcome to the webinar. And that's actually a perfect moment for you to join in, because obviously you're Global Director of Food Safety at ADM. So what's your take on the kind of contribution of informatics systems to regulatory compliance? How do you see it?
I think you've asked a very important question. And I think what informatics and data management has done in terms of regulatory is that it has helped companies to make better decisions in setting up priorities for regulatory compliance. What this has done is that informatics has helped companies to translate to greater efficiency and productivity gains, to understand where do we put investment and what do we need to do to ensure regulatory compliance. Regulatory compliance is so vague and so big and can be interpreted in many ways. However, using informatics and data management has been able to help in trends, in data analysis, in understanding what are the emerging topics and what are the emerging customer feedback that can be action planned. So I think in terms of regulatory compliance, data analysis and informatics has helped companies and food and beverage manufacturers in able to prioritize their risk and understand where should they put more emphasis on as they solve this problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really succinct answer. I think one of the other questions which I probably would kind of direct to you, Denny, as obviously you've only just joined us, is around that kind of role for informatics in quality control. How do you see that? How do you see it in terms of quality control, lab testing? How does informatics play out and help there?
You see, in this rapidly changing world, informatics and data analysis again has one important element that I always talk about, and that is time. The current day customer does not have time to wait for their product. So in terms of fast turnaround time, supply chain efficiency, I think that analysis has helped food and beverage manufacturers in what I call strategic planning and innovation, where the companies can understand what are the needs and demands of the customer so that they can rapidly fulfill those needs of the customer. One will understand that using these rapid methods of informatics and data analysis helps in automation and workflow optimization at the factory level, so that the product do not get delayed to the customer and the customer gets the good and the safe and the quality product when they want it, how they want it in real time. So I think in terms of quality control, quality assurance, I think that analysis plays a very important role with effectiveness and efficiency, and like I said, in having the optimum fast turnaround time.
Brilliant. I think
and not just time as well. I'd say it gives you better confidence in the information you're getting as well, because you're much more certain that what you're reading on the screen is correct. So it enables quality managers to make much better decisions because they're 100% confident that what they're seeing is correct. They're not having to collect it from different sources and understand who was it who filled this in. The information's there, the data's there. You know the integrity is good, so you can make the correct decision much faster, much more easier, and much more confidently.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're absolutely right. I think absolutely right. It's in terms of making the best decisions in a reasonable time. So I think that analysis and informatics helps companies to make the best decisions in real time, which helps the business to progress and also ultimately helps the customer to get what they want when they want it.
We've got a few questions from the audience. Sorry, Brandon, you go ahead. I
was going to say, to that point, historically, one of the drivers of buying informatics solutions were compliance. But what we're seeing for most of our food customers now is it's really about consistency and speed to market. Like again, it's getting that batch from manufacturing to the consumer through the supply chain as efficiently and effectively as possible. And that's really their driver. And that's changed a bit, I think, over the last few years.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got a few questions for the audience, but before we get to those, there's one last question from me, which is, as I always like to end on for webinars, is around the future. And so, Lee, what kind of emerging trends do you see in informatics that you think are going to be really super relevant to food and beverage companies in the future?
The price coming down.
That would definitely be a good trend, as always.
That will help. Yeah.
Brandon, what about you?
I think we see a couple of things. So one is devices more geared towards the manufacturing environment, especially in food where it's noisy, loud, you get a lot of disturbance, heavy equipment. And then the other thing we're continuing to see, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this from a vendor, is obviously AI, right? So models that, and I want to be fair, often when we think of AI, we think of generative AI, and generative AI is great. But a lot of what you're really looking at, I think, as we get into manufacturing isn't just generative AI, but it's a lot of ML and other things that really help drive efficiency and automate processes and enable the repeatability to be done by the machine as opposed to the harder to find human commodity, which then enables those commodities, to Lee's point, to be more focused on data analysis and predictive measurement than just the mundane activity of repeat sample collection. So we're seeing a lot of investment there in things that enable the solutions to be implemented faster, which might be through generative AI or through other kinds of automation and AI that enable the collection of the data needed to be faster and easier and more automated.
Jenny, what kind of trends are you seeing?
I think the trend I'm seeing varies. And I think based on what I'm seeing, there is not a one-stop approach to in terms of trend. I think it varies by country, it varies by region, it varies by product type and commodity. So I probably will be a little leery of saying one trend is particular to all, but my opinion is that the trends vary from different variations of just those that I highlighted.
Excellent. I think actually just picking up on a point that Brandon made, I think it is really, really important when we talk about AI to distinguish between generative AI and machine learning generally. And because we've all heard kind of some scare stories around AI, and what we're talking about there is very early kind of stage generative stuff. Machine learning is a very, very established area. And really kind of way ahead in terms of some of the impact, I think, on industry that we can get from it. So I just think it's always good to be clear about, when we talk about AI, what are we talking about exactly? And I'm sure you see that as well, Brandon.
I do, because there is that distinction, right? And a lot of, to your point, Ian, a lot of value that we see as we continue to advance informatics solutions is more in the RPA and AI than it is, or in the ML than it is generative. I think we'll see generative kind of creep in where maybe help articles and things like that, system usage or maybe configuration can be done more effectively. But when it comes to the real value of the processing data, that's in the RPA and the ML, which has been around for decades.
Okay. So let me also chip in this. With AI, with automation, with technological applications, with robots, with machine learning, equipment upgrade, to be honest, that's the future of food processing and manufacturing. The days of manual labor, the days of employee-heavy work lifting are gradually coming to an end. So we've touched on an important aspect of technological applications and AI and machine learning as the future of how food is going to be manufactured. If you look at food factories right now, the workforce is gradually thinning out. We actually will have applications out there and job postings, and you're not finding the right candidates. So the future of companies beginning to understand, how do we get AI and machine learning and technology and robots and all these things into operations is becoming very important for us right now. Companies to start investing in technology and understanding that what are CCPs or CPs of requisite programs that are crucial to food safety or quality can we begin to automate? And I think that is where companies need to start looking into invest.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd agree with you there. And we're seeing the machine learning side of AI being able to plug into our existing process as well. It's not necessarily new things. It's making our old things better. Vision systems is a good example, great example for machine learning, and our X-ray machines as well, which we've had for 20 years. But now we're seeing ways of capable of plugging in machine learning into those original systems and retrofitting it to improve our current processes even better. So it's not just new things that are coming along, it's improving the old things too.
So that's a good point to kind of go along to a few questions from the audience. And one that's come up is, how does a LIMS or informatics platform help manufacturers adapt to changing customer demands and accelerate NPI? I think that sounds like one for you, Brandon.
Sure. So I think, again, the way we're seeing LIMS systems help is, one of the ways we're seeing it is, to our earlier conversation, is customers are extending them outside of just the lab and leverage them through the process as a way to collect data and analyze and get real-time reporting as they're manufacturing. So back to Lee's point, is they're investing in sensors and vision systems on old equipment or new equipment, having somewhere to put that data and then process and report on it quickly is highly valuable. So that's a lot of the value we're seeing, right, is it's becoming part of your predictive quality analysis as opposed to your reactive lab testing quality.
Yeah.
And this one, I think, is definitely one for Lee. So Kraft Heinz, what systems play a critical role in ensuring food safety? Obviously, I doubt you can kind of go into too much detail about that, but if you can give us some broad, big picture stuff, that would be great.
It's all of the above, really. It's all the systems we use. We're not using any of them for the fun of it. They're all there for a reason and all being used, and they're all important from the ERP downwards, really. But probably the most important ones, the ones I was talking about earlier, that are bringing that information together into a usable form. The most important ones is enabling people to act on the information that's perhaps always been there. These machines have been capable of producing this information this data for quite some time, but we haven't done anything with it. We haven't been looking at it because it's been locked away inside the unit, or it's producing a report that nobody reads. The systems that have taken that information and put them into a usable format that anyone can interpret quickly and easily have been the most valuable ones.
There's a question around kind of data-driven decision making, which I don't know of any industry in which that is not a hot topic. So maybe, Denny, you might be able to address this. The question is kind of how has data-driven decision-making impacted your internal quality or manufacturing processes? What examples have you seen of that kind of impact?
I think a very good one I can is that using these has been able to align the customer goals with the customer expectations with the company goals. I think what this does is that using data and analysis in this concept helps to align the messages of the company, the manufacturer, with the buyers and the consumers. Understanding in this fast-paced environment how to shape the emerging habits of what the customer wants with the offering that the customer, the manufacturer is willing to process. So I think in this climate of this fast-paced environment, merging the needs of the consumers with the capabilities and capacities of the manufacturers is one of the things that I've seen that is working well. And I also see that it is helping to sustain new habits. Using these contextual clues of data analysis has also helped to generate some granular level of confidence in the food industry. It shows that we are listening. It shows that we are rapidly adapting to what the customer wants. And I think just like we said the other time, right after the pharmaceutical industry is proving that the integrity of the food industry can be sustained.
Lee, have you got any other examples you'd like to add on that one?
Just to agree what Denny said, really, it's a very similar situation for us.
Brandon, have you seen any kind of specific examples from customers of how that data-driven decision-making has kind of had some real impact? You don't necessarily have to name the customers, but if you've seen some good examples of that, that'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this a bit, but one thing we're seeing is customers that have significantly reduced their add back and waste so that they're able to more quickly and effectively get the batches they're starting to produce to market in the way they expect, right? So like if you do the studies, and I don't specifically know what it is for Kraft and Heinz, but like in the food industries I worked in, when we got to the point where we were using add back as part of our product, right, our margins went maybe to zero, or we were losing money because of the overall cost of remanufacturing, reprocessing, reutilization of the energy. Like in a lot of food products where you're already dealing with a razor thin margin, the minute you have waste, add back, and all those other things you have to manage, you're just adding cost to what's already a low margin product. So we're seeing, a lot of our customers are successfully eliminating or significantly reducing waste in that whole process there. The other thing we're seeing is, and why a lot of them, like I said, are starting to make bigger investments in informatics solutions, is that speed to market, right? That flow from product ideation all the way to the fact of getting it to the consumer, and their ability to accelerate that process and do it with a high standard of quality and a high standard of manufacturing reliability is another big reason why they're investing in solutions.
I guess one of the questions come up from the audience is around using informatics to help improve product development or innovation. I think, Lee, you've kind of touched on this already, but are there any other kind of comments you'd like to add on that, or anything else you'd like to address with that question?
I think it comes, everything we've been talking about comes back to the quality and the integrity of the data. Being able to get this information out, we've got really strong confidence in what was the decisions that we're making, and being able to make those data decisions based on the correct data. And it's all very well making a data driven decision, but if your data is rubbish, then you're going to make the wrong decisions. And the informatics is because we know it's right, we know it's good, we can make those decisions correctly as well as quickly, which are both equally as important.
And you are very right. If you look at, for example, again, the blockchain technology is being used globally right now to improve traceability and transparency in the food supply chain. So if you look at such an application like this, it's gaining widespread application globally. Everybody is using it, and I think it helps again to establish that credibility that we want as an industry. So again, understanding that informatics and technology is the way of the future, and as food manufacturers, we need to start working towards that horizon. It becomes very important for us.
And we've got time for one more question, I think, just about. So I'm going to start with you again, Denny. So what is one piece of advice you would recommend to your peers and people in the food industry about harnessing and using informatics?
So what I'm going to add is that as we're working on informatics, as we're working on good data, let's be sure that we are working on the good informatics and the good data. A bad data will lead to a bad decision and will not realize the achieved goals. So if we're working on informatics, the credibility and the integrity of the informatics and the data becomes very crucial for us as we're making decisions, as we're analyzing it, as we're understanding trends and patterns. So the credibility and integrity of the informatics is very key. A bad data will lead us to nowhere.
Absolutely.
Lee,
I'd suggest starting small as well. Don't try and do everything at once. Pick a specific example, a specific use case you want to do, and start small and do that first. It's very tempting when you see all the advantages to dive right in and try and get it across the entire business straight away. So the returns are so great and so wonderful that everybody wants to do it. But try it small, get it proven, and use that and expand from there. And I'd say Brendan probably, I'm sure, will agree with me. Use experts. Don't try and do this as part of your day job, and get people who aren't experts in it to try and do it, because that's where you get the bad data and the bad systems, and the architecture all goes to pot and it all goes wrong from the beginning, and you give up before you get going. So start small, use an expert, and do it properly to begin with.
Over to you, Brandon.
Yeah, kind of building on what Lee said, I agree. Start small, stay focused on your business case. Try not to over-engineer things because you think you might get a lot of value out of it, or try not to over-engineer things because you're resisting the potential change and efficiency that you can gain by leveraging these systems. And the other thing I would say is be engaged. What we often see as vendors is the companies kind of throw the implementation over the wall to us, and they're like, we want you to go implement this. But to Lee's point, without the experts in the business who really understand how your process works, not just understand the limbs, it's hard to effectively really implement those solutions. So I think it's key to have ownership from the business and the business to be engaged.
Definitely.
Brilliant. So we're about at time now. So just to wrap up, big thank you from all of us at New Food to Lee, to Denny, to Brandon, to Starlims, especially for sponsoring this. Thank you. I'm going to give extra thanks to Denny for persevering and managing to get onto the call eventually. Absolute pleasure to work with you all. And hopefully we can talk again soon, because this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.